Hey, welcome back. Questions can be super hard. The worst questions of all are when people ask, like, what is your favorite band? Or even worse, what's your favorite song? Those types of questions are so fluid. Sure, this week I might have said that I'm really into Gregory Alan Isakov, but last week I might have said that my favorite band is Pup. And recently, Spotify told me that in 2019 I spent the most time listening to American football, so maybe they're my favorite band. I sometimes get the same thing as a history student. I've had people ask me, like, what's your favorite part of history? And for a long time, it kind of bothered me that I didn't have a favorite. It seems like most people who like history get into a niche and really dig into it, but I never could pick. That is, until I discovered historiography. I'm sorry, that is, in fact, the most pretentious thing I've ever said out loud. But hang in there. Historiography is the history of history, and I know that doesn't sound like it should be a thing, but it totally is. For example, historiography would be the study of how historians from different nations recorded the quote unquote discovery of the New World and how our accepted narrative of those events has changed over time. This is my favorite thing about history, and I've tried to weasel it into the other two episodes, and now that you know that there's a name for it, it's probably obvious that that's my angle. And while I really enjoy this type of study, it's also important to remember that history can just be fun. No meta theory involved. So, with that, here is an insanely fun and exciting and criminal story about a lady named Eleanor Dumont. If the music didn't give it away, here's a spoiler. We're going to the Old West. Dumont's story begins with the bane of every historian's existence, an unknown origin. What we know for sure is that she first appeared in San Francisco in about 1849, and at that point she appeared to be 20 years old. And though we don't know her exact origin, it's thought that she was born as Simone Jules in 1829 to French Creole parents in New Orleans. Dumont immediately began making a name for herself as a card dealer and a gambler. Rowdy men from all around San Francisco would come to be dealt a hand by this mysterious French gambler. I've seen her described many times as like elegant and dignified, which is a really funny image to me of like this very proper, pretty, like nice lady dressed up like dealing cards to a bunch of old, smelly miners. But I guess that's what she did, and it seems to be her racket for pretty much her whole life. But her time in San Francisco was cut short when she was accused of card sharping, which I had to look up, but apparently that's just like messing with the cards. So she got out before she got taken out, if you know what I mean. And the next place she pops up is Nevada City, California, in 1854. She instantly started grabbing people's attention with her fancy clothes and like aristocratic demeanor, and she hovered around town for a few days, and just when the gossip was like about to explode, she answered everyone's questions by putting out an ad in the local paper advertising her new business, which she called the best gambling emporium in Northern California, with free champagne. Her gambling hall was called Vignette Une, I think, is how you pronounce that. And she only allowed well-kept, well-mannered, and well-respected men. In fact, it was basically an invitation-only type of place. She filled it with the most expensive carpet and furniture that she could find and added gas lamps and chandeliers as well. I definitely don't work in marketing, but I feel like this is sending a clear message to her patrons. I'm fancy, this building is fancy, and only fancy men are allowed, and the stakes are high because we're all fancy. So, just as it worked in San Francisco, the prospect of being dealt a game by this pretty and flirtatious lady brought many men into the gambling hall, but what kept them coming back was Dumont's skill and expertise at the table. Her coy demeanor wasn't an act, it was a hustle. And she usually won and would treat the losers with dignity and free champagne, which probably gave them the liquid courage they needed to go in on another game. The Vignette Une eventually became so successful that Dumont picked up a business partner named David Tobin, and together they opened Dumont's Place, another high-stakes gambling den. But unfortunately, the gold rush was a fickle mistress, and once the gold dried up, so did Dumont's clientele. She boarded up her business and moved to the next great boomtown, Columbia, California. And it is said in Columbia that she set up her gambling table in a hotel rather than opening her own business. And I guess this is probably a good place to stop. I think that we can mark everything before now as the glory days and everything after now as the mischief days. So let's hear from a sponsor before we get into too much mischief. Alright, maybe you're like me and you've tried to start a podcast 30 times, but you quit every time because it's just too dang hard. Well, if that's true, you need to check out Anchor. Why? Because, well, first, it's free, which is a great reason to try anything. But second, it's got creation tools right inside the app that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. Super convenient. Also, it helps you distribute your podcast, which in my opinion is by far the hardest and most obnoxious part. And you can make money from it with no minimum listenership. It's got everything you need to make a podcast right in one place, which is crazy convenient. And that's what we all want, really. So if you're interested, download the free Anchor app today, or go to anchor.fm to get started. While we're paused for a second, it's probably a good idea to talk about how, even though she played this charming and flirtatious character at the gambling table, we don't really know anything about her personal life. There's no marriage records, there's no rumors of a secret love affair, there's no birth certificates for her children. I mean, there's nothing really to go off of. This changes, though, a little bit after she moves to Carson City. The hotel lobby wasn't proving to be as lucrative as she thought it would be, so she bought a ranch and tried to go straight. But she didn't really know the ranch game very well and felt out of her element, which, unluckily for her, she ran into a man named Jack McKnight who claimed to be a ranch expert. The two started working together and Dumont started to have feelings for him, but after only a month of working together, McKnight sold Dumont's ranch without her permission, stole her cash, and left her buried under a mountain of debt that she didn't even know that she accrued. Allegedly, in true Old West fashion, Dumont tracked him back to San Francisco and settled her debts with a blast from her double-barreled shotgun, which is quite extreme. It's just, sometimes I think about the Old West and it startles me, the things that you could do to settle a debt. But after feeling some heat from the cops for, just shooting a guy over some debt, she hopped over to the next boomtown. And actually, after this crime is alleged to have happened, Dumont's name pops up everywhere from Montana to Arizona. Apparently, she was following her model of ride into town, charm the locals, gamble them out of some money, and move off. Basically all over the whole West. But there's this one very important place that we should talk about. I think it was while she was in Benton, Montana. She's developed a faint dark mustache on her upper lip, and so out of spite, a losing patron started calling her Madame Mustache, and the name apparently stuck. So now that she's a murderer, it's only fitting that she like pop up in all the Old West classic towns. So she appears in Deadwood and Tombstone, and all the while her reputation is only growing. Some say that she dropped two robbers that were trying to steal her purse with a derringer that she kept underneath her like sophisticated French lady skirt. In another story from Fort Benton again, after she heard that a boat containing smallpox was on its way to town, she went to the docks and waved her two pistols in the air until the captain was too afraid to dock and kept going. So she maybe saved a whole town from smallpox. I don't know. It's also said that she like regularly fed and sheltered the poor and homeless, but not every story about her is really that wholesome. Um, and this is one of the more like substantial ones, unfortunately. But as she got older, her like talents for being young and pretty and drawing in stinky minors kind of were fading. So she resorted to becoming a true brothel madam. And apparently she wasn't like ashamed of it at all because she would routinely parade her ladies out through town wearing like 1870s lingerie, uh, much to the chagrin of the other townswomen. And most of this is conjecture, like a lot of Old West tales. They're passed from generation to generation, and it's the kind of thing that gets printed in like a cheap Western paperback. But there are a few things that we know for sure. And in 1877, a newspaper in Deadwood printed this about Dumont.
A character who attracts the attention of all strangers is Madame Mustache, a plump little French lady perhaps 40 years of age, but splendidly preserved. She derives her name, which is the only one she is known by, from a dainty strip of black hair upon her upper lip. She deals her own game and is quite popular with the boys, who treat her with marked respect. She has bright black eyes and a musical voice, and there is something attractive about her as she looks up and smiles and says, "Will you play, monsieur?" No one knows her history, but she's said to be very rich, always the same smiling, polite little woman, always making money.
The other concrete source of documentation we have for Dumont's life is rather unfortunate. In 1879, she was down on her luck and borrowed $300 from her friend in order to open up a table. She placed a bad bet, and the aftermath was recorded in the Bodie Morning News on September 9th.
A suicide. Yesterday morning, a sheep herder, while in pursuit of his avocation, discovered the dead body of a woman lying 100 yards from the Bridgeport Road, a mile from town. Her head rested on a stone, and the appearance of the body indicated that death was a result of natural causes. Ex officio coroner Justice Peterson was at once notified, and he dispatched a wagon in charge of H. Ward to that place, who brought the body to the undertaking rooms. Deceased was named Eleanor Dumont and was recognized as the woman who had been engaging in dealing a 21 game in the Magnolia Saloon. Her death evidently occurred from an overdose of morphine, an empty bottle having the peculiar smell of that drug being found beside the body. The history connected with the unfortunate suicide is but a repetition of that of many others who have followed the life of a female gambler, with the exception perhaps the subject of this item bore a character for virtue possessed by few in her line. To the good-hearted women of the town must we accord praise for their accustomed kindness in doing all in their power to prepare the unfortunate woman's body for burial.
So this is where we run into some troubles with this story. Um, Most of it's legend in unsubstantiated claims and mixed signals. I mean, just before her death, the last thing that we know about her is that she was flaunting her ladies around from her brothel like some sort of female supervillain. But then in her obituary, they're talking about how virtuous she was and how well respected she was by the community. So it's kind of the same way with all of these Old West legends. I mean, you kind of have to choose how much you believe for yourself. Either way, it's a very fun story, and it reveals a couple things about the Old West that I think really draws people in. Um, I love Old West history, and I hate like the country. I'm from farm country, and I don't really like it, but I love Old West stories, and I think the two primary things that draw people in are the fact that like you get this amazing environment where you can just like gun down your ex-boyfriend, and most people are fine with it, and also the West had this really interesting ability of giving women a lot of freedoms that they didn't experience in the colonial East. And it's taking everything in my power not to talk about something horribly nerdy about like the importance of primary sources or something. But remember, I said I wouldn't do that. The story is just fun. A lot of these Old West stories are just meant to be fun. I mean, a mustachioed French lady dressed in her most elegant gown gunning down robbers and her ex-boyfriend? I mean, that's amazing. That's like a Quentin Tarantino film. What an awesome image. And look, even though a lot of the details are unsubstantiated, the outline is there. Her name does pop up in newspapers all over the West. And you know what? I don't even think there's a really great historical parable in here. I mean, I guess be fancy and hustle hard. Have a nice week.